Hello everyone, my name is Kamal Manocha. I represent PMS AIF World. Today's webinar is a very special webinar because we have kept topic which is pertinent to what many investors, many advisors today want to know. We're not going to talk any conceptual stuff, but we'll talk real stuff that how one should think of constructing one's portfolio given the current uncertainty. India is undergoing a very uncertain time. I have myself faced COVID in last 2 weeks, and I can tell you I have in my mind too much fear at the moment, and I can see that in most of our clients we are sitting on liquidity, but we do not know what to do. At the same time, economy over last 3 quarters has shown some positive numbers, and that kind of keeps equity market intact. But we do not know what is way forward. At the same time, there have been many stocks which have been in talks, from Reliance Industries to Tata Consumer to Syngene International. Likewise, many names I can take, which have been in talks over last almost 1.5 years. But even these stocks have been struggling. I'm not going to talk about older stories like ITC and not particularly we're going to cover stocks, but primarily a real thing we're going to discuss, that how to construct portfolio given current times, given the current uncertainty, and what is the way forward. And for that, we have a very special guest, Mr. Naveen Chandramohan, who comes with 15 years of experience. He did his MBA from IIM Ahmedabad 15 years ago, and then he was associated with certain research firms. Before starting ITUS as founder and CEO, he was associated with Nomura as head of research. He particularly brings 10 years of experience having done fund management. And the PMS that he is managing by name ITUS Capital is a PMS which has a very right and consistent track record of last 3 years. He's one of those fund managers who are not too active on social media, but actually are delivering performance. And that is why I found that he is the right fund manager to ask some of these real questions so that we can get true and real answers. And welcome to you, Naveen. So you can start by first giving context, to the webinar. If you have prepared any presentation, you can kind of show that, and then it will be between both of us. We will discuss. I have some real questions for you. We will address those.
Absolutely. I mean, thanks a lot, Kamal, for this kind introduction. Sincerely appreciate this. And before starting off, I wanted to thank everyone for taking time to be even attending this. Like you mentioned, you are coming out of COVID, and I'm glad that you're recovering well. Very dear friends, dear relatives of mine who've gone through really hard times, and I can't imagine what people are going through. This is a tough phase. We have to be optimistic as people, even though we are in India, we are in the middle of a second wave, in the middle of a pandemic. It is hard, but one has to look at tomorrow rather than worry about yesterday. That's the outlook that we need to have in life as well. So I want to use that context to start off with a brief presentation that I have prepared around how we look at things as we stand today. So Kamal, is it possible to open up the slide? Perfect. So as investors, I think one thing that we are going to be constantly faced with, whether we like it or not, is headlines that worry us from time to time. Obviously, the pandemic that we are going through is none like what we have faced any time in the last 50 or 60 years. For anyone who's lived through SARS, and I for one happened to be in Hong Kong at that point of time, so I have seen it in close quarters. But at the same time, this is of a different scale, a different dynamic, and when it hits us so close, it is not funny anymore. So the first question is, it's very easy to sit back and say that, should we panic, right? But I've always been a very strong believer in the concept of learning from history. When you are in the middle of a storm, it's very difficult to isolate or disassociate yourself and say, how do we actually stay calm through this? And sometimes history It does exactly that, right? So if you look at the past crisis and where it's come from, what is the season of onset and the potential possible origin, one thing is common across the board. Most of the pandemics that have happened has had 2 to 3 phases in which the severity amplifies or the severity kind of tapers off after the second phase, right? So while we are in the middle of one, which originated in China late in 2019, most people would say for India, the relevance came in March 2020. But the second wave, was it a surprise? Could we have been better prepared? The honest answer is yes, right? However, we are not. That is very clear. So there's no point of basically looking back and said, what could we have done? So basically, if I was to summarize the previous table, most of the outbreaks in the last 80 plus years have happened in the space of 2 years. Most of them have had a second phase, and many of them have gone on into the third phase as well. However, all of this have resulted in us tapering off. And the good thing is, though the numbers don't seem very effective from a vaccination rate, it is commonsensical to understand the fact that vaccination is a way to go. While people can laugh at data, the very fact that Israel is 90% vaccinated and they are actually back on the streets without wearing masks gives comfort to the fact that there are going to be tail cases where the vaccination is going to have some kind of untoward effects. But probabilistically speaking, that's the solution and one can't run away from it. Now, we are dealt with reality, right? We can't run away from it. So now, if you look back again from the numbers, April was a horrid time, especially for anyone from Maharashtra. That's where the cases started to peak out and panic began, right? And this is again shown in terms of the growth rate in active cases, especially the 7-day moving average. The data source for this comes from the India COVID-19 tracker. The good thing again is, in this second wave, the cumulative growth rate, as we call it, continues to fall and is currently at 2.1%. While it doesn't seem that to be the case, especially when media portrays it in the form of absolute numbers, when you talk about growth rate, that certainly is falling. The second thing that one needs to take solace from is the fact that what is the case of recovered numbers from a moving average perspective, right? So obviously, as the number of cases are increasing, one does expect the number of recovery cases also to be improving, right? That's a function of selective states going into semi-lockdown or full lockdown. We're going to see more of that across states, along with the fact that the vaccination effectiveness continues to improve. This is the scary part, right? So when you start looking at daily deaths, right, and when you start looking at graphs like this, it's destabilizing to look at. Not as an investor. I'm here more so talking as a human being, right? It doesn't matter so much around investing anymore. It's about talking as a human being. How do you even look at this? The only solace to take from here again is the fact that the daily deaths are stabilizing. While we are going through this, it doesn't feel that, but the numbers certainly say the number from a moving average perspective is stabilizing. So net, what I would want anyone looking at this to take away is this situation is not something that anyone can take lightly. The situation is as serious as it can get at the moment. However, on the ground numbers say that things are flattening out. The implementation from here, with the fact that states are going into selective lockdowns, should put things back on track. Now, while all of this is happening from a pandemic perspective, let's take another step back to look at what is happening to the real economy, right? Because while once you start putting numbers and show the fact that the deaths are increasing, it's a cause for panic for anyone, and it's real, right? But how do the numbers of the real economy stack up today? So for those who can't read this in a very legible way, this talks about the GST collections on a month-on-month basis over the last, let's say, 7 to 8 months. The trend has been positive, and even in April, right, which if you look at it over the last 7 months, you had the highest monthly GST collection from the government as we speak in April. Now, there is reason to believe pessimists will come out and say the May numbers could drop, right? The question is not whether the May numbers drop or the June numbers drop. The question is the trend as we come out of it, and what could happen as an economy as we begin to see growth. Now, when that growth is, that's not the objective of saying that whether it's going to come 1 month or 2 months or 3 months from now. The objective is to zoom out and say where is the trend today as we go further. Now, one of the things that you look at from an economy perspective is to say if an economy is actually growing on the ground, certain indicators, right, from how the power consumed in the economy changes. So if you look at, for example, L30 talks about the last 30 days of actual power consumption, right? And this data is again taken from the Power Data Economic Affairs site, versus LL30 talks about the same period 1 year ago, 30 days of the same period 1 year ago. There's been a robust increase in terms of power consumption over this particular period, right? And this again shows that the real on the ground economy, because end of the day, if an industry is not functioning, it's fair to say that the power consumption is going to deteriorate drastically. And that's not what you actually see. The graph on the right talks about the same thing over a 90-day period. So 30 days for a short term, 90 days slightly more over, and granularized over 3 months period. This is again a very interesting stat that one needs to look at, because end of the day, you're talking about the real economy from a tax collection perspective. You're talking about the power consumption on the ground. You're also talking about the logistics within the country, right? So once the government made FASTags mandatory, this graph basically talks about the FASTag issuance right from the beginning of the lockdown. So the number is going to come off a low base. There's no doubt about it, because if you look at April 20, you are talking about kind of the peak lockdown in the country. The important, again, the takeaway from this is not to say that you're having a 1032% year-on-year growth. That's not the point. The point is to basically say that there is stabilization. Again, April, there was a drop-off. That's again expected, considering the fact that certain states began to put in selective restrictions on travel. But we are looking at healthy numbers at a fairly economic growth perspective as we stand today. What does all this mean as an investor, and how do we look at this from an economic perspective? Here again, I'm going to take a step zoomed out and comment about this. As far as India is concerned and the way we see it, it's very clear that India is now at an inflection point around positioning itself as a manufacturing hub economy. Now, if you go back in time, that was what China started its inflection point as an economy around back in 2004. India, that I see in 2021, very similar to how China was from a statistics perspective around what percentage of manufacturing contribution to the GDP came from back in 2005. Another tailwind for this to actually prolong itself is the fact of where interest rates are. Now, many people might not pay attention or might not remember. So when we started the fund in 2017, a typical conversation went like this, right? So many investors at that point of time who were taking a decision between, let's say, debt and equity. Your FD rates were 9.2%. So if you assume that base case equity returns in a so-called sensible market is 12.5%, one could question, for a 3% risk premium, do I even need to take equity returns? Today, that return from a fixed income perspective has dropped all the way to 4.5%. And that differential is no longer trivial. So interest rates being low is a big fillip in India for the first time in the last 30 years for our economy to grow. The third thing is, where is the Indian saving lying as we speak? Obviously, gold and real estate will form a significant portion of our economy. That's been built up over the last 30 years, and that's not going to change materially. But all we are saying is, if out of the 66% of the GDP, which is where FDs are today, even if 10% comes out into the market, the tailwinds for the Indian economy is no longer trivial. And the last part, which talks about the GST collections, where did that even begin from? Because Indian economy, the unorganized sector contributing to the GDP was almost 70%. And that is certainly coming down, right? Now, with the GST implementation and the fact that the inflection point and the numbers are picking up, you would expect that the organized sector begins to contribute a lot more. All of this makes one wonder, saying that there is a beautiful base that is being set up for our country, where you would say that this is an inflection point from an economic perspective. Now, in the middle of COVID, there is always a dart that is thrown at you that one needs to go through in order to come out on the other side. There are positives that we are seeing in the economy. There is a difficult phase that one needs to go through. There is no denying that. But net, if you zoom out, things are a lot better than what most people anticipate on the ground. Now, obviously, considering the fact that we're talking markets, we're talking economy, it's not going to be fair for me to basically wind up by saying that I'm not going to talk about how a portfolio, as far as we are concerned, should have an exposure to. I think these are 4 sectors that we have exposure to as a fund. And personally, we believe that every investor should have an exposure if they believe they are long-term. And when I say long-term, I'm talking over a 3-year horizon. I'm not talking about 10, 20-year horizon out here. That's not how we manage money, right? So for the next 3 years, as we see things and the thesis plans out, we certainly believe that there are these 4 sectors should have a significant contribution to every investor's portfolio, be it in the form of IT bar technology, be it in the form of pharma. Third is domestic manufacturing. Again, domestic manufacturing is broad. You can have manufacturing in the form of contract manufacturing. You can have it in the form of pharma, or you can have it in the form of specialty chemicals. Most of this have had significant tailwinds, and we expect that to continue. And fourth is your typical platform or infrastructure place, where you have both the effects of economies of scale come in and the ability for network effect to kick in. So these are 4 plays that we believe should be a part of most investors' portfolio. Having said that, I would like to wind up the presentation here and open up more of a conversational aspect of this, where you can, we'll look to answer any questions that you may have.
Right, Naveen, thank you for sharing all these data points. So the first question that comes to my mind, 1 year ago when we had first wave, and post that when markets started to go up, there were eminent fund managers like Mr. Ramdev Agarwal ji, Mr. Nilesh Shah, Hiren Ved. I have done, their interviews. They quoted that because this wave started from China is now, the face of China is open to entire world, and all the international companies which have their manufacturing units in China, they would want to transfer their, manufacturing units from China to India, or maybe use India as another second alternative. Not just India, but maybe another Asian country as second alternative for setting up their manufacturing units. Obviously, because India had reduced corporate tax rate and had brought some, shops for starting manufacturing from India. Now, after the second wave, the way, India has managed and the way things have messed, there is too much pessimism around, and, people are questioning that forget FDI flows, but there can be a question mark to even FII flows. What are your views? How do you view this scenario? And do you think, there is a way out of this pessimism? How long will it take? Over to you.
Sure. So I think back in 2020, the reason for optimism was a genuine one, right? Because if you thought about it, if Apple had their manufacturing plant and their assembly plant predominantly in China, they were looking at diversifying it in order to ensure that the concentration risk on one particular region reduces. And India was certainly the prime region to benefit from this. Now, the problem with us is the tailwinds for our growth is real, but the execution from time and time again, there are times where we don't take the full benefit of it. So even if you look at it, a lot of the manufacturing base moved to Vietnam, Bangladesh, and Southeast Asian countries. Why? Because the labor productivity there is a lot better than India, right? However, India cannot be ignored in the grand scheme of things, because if you are saying that I want to move even 20% of my manufacturing from China, your Vietnam and Bangladesh can't take up that capacity. It has to come to India, right? You really need to mess things up really badly for you to not take advantages of the situation. So the question that you asked today in the middle of this pessimism seems real, but you're also seeing that the same Apple that I spoke to you about has set up one of its largest manufacturing plants in Tamil Nadu, in the outskirts. So the move is just not hearsay. The move is not just about talking, but the shift is happening. Can it be faster? The answer is yes. Is it going to be faster? Time will say. Because in the middle of this, you're not going to say that the companies who are multinational companies are going to move it right away, because this is not the market for people to immediately move. So if you're going to say, when is it going to happen, right? I mean, we will have to live through this second wave. Things have to stabilize. The confidence level is not gone yet, right? On the ground, there is fear because of what we are experiencing today at a family level. And that fear is translating into the international community as well. So in my mind, it's a pause. It doesn't mean that it's not going to happen. There could be a delay, right? So it's up to us on the ground to execute better, because so there are two kinds of opportunities. One is beyond your control, one is in your control. The opportunity in front of India today is in our control. As long as we execute this phase right, we made mistakes, there's no doubt about it. It doesn't mean it can't be corrected. So my honest 2 cents around this is there could be a delay, but it doesn't mean it's gone.
In last 10 years, one sector which had actually given phenomenal returns was discretionary consumption. So if you have to select one theme for next decade, given the current uncertainty or the optimism that you are seeing amidst this uncertainty, what will that theme be? Or if you want to maybe quote 2 themes.
So one thing that I would like to tell investors is very nice to say, let's select a theme for the next decade. I'll ask investors to go back in time in 2010. So in 2010, I was a fund manager working for a company, right? I used to plead with my fund manager, let's add Nestle and Asian Paints. Both of these ideas were dismissed, saying that the growth rate was not robust enough. People can go back in 2010 and verify where Asian Paints was trading as a multiple of sales. It was almost, the market cap was around 2.5 times a sales multiple. Today, you're talking about 12 times sales multiple, right? So end of the day, when you are standing back in history and say that 10 years, let's talk about a theme, it's very difficult to basically give a 10-year view. And when I say a long-term view, I always think about it in 3-year blocks. You think of it as 3 years. Evaluate your thesis. It's never a buy, hold, and forget investment style. It's always the role of a fund manager is to risk manage. At least that's how we think about this. So to answer your question, if I was to basically say 2 themes that I think should benefit over the course of the next 3 years, and we will reevaluate this thesis. One is pharma, and second is domestic manufacturing. And domestic manufacturing specific to R&D driven specialty chemicals. So today the word specialty chemicals is a misused one, because many of the so-called commodity chemicals have become specialty. unless and until you have an R&D and a science element to it, the niche that you bring to the table is very little. So I'm making a differentiation there rather than saying specialty chemicals across the board. So these two themes, I think, should continue to play out well, because the tailwinds are not over a 6-month and a 1-year horizon. The tailwinds, the way we see things, are a lot longer.
Sure. So you talked about two stocks, Asian Paints and Nestle, way back 10 years ago. And let me tell you, I ask this question to everyone I do this interaction with, because there is a selfish reason, because I myself hold these stocks. And why and one of your friends, one of your competitors, Mr. Saurabh Mukherjee, has actually taught all of us over the last 3 years that irrespective of theme, irrespective of sector, one should just invest in a focused and concentrated portfolio of some of the best businesses. Definition of best taken from their history and market share and return on capital employed, and they being best in terms of showing numbers in a consistent manner, and that is why they're called consistent compounders. But at the same time, there are some of the old fund managers who have 30 years of experience, who question this and who say that ultimately investing in quality at any price does not work always. One needs to be cognizant of value, and especially when economy shows upward move. Over the last 3, 4, 5 years, India's economy was going down, GDP numbers were going down, and that is why maybe some of the quality stocks have risen. But now, when you are also projecting and everybody is projecting that there could be a pause, but eventually we will see India's core sector performing. So given this context, what is your view on some of these consistent compounders, some of these stocks which today have become heavyweight stocks in most of the portfolio? Because I can tell you my portfolio would have 70% allocation to some of these names, and I can tell you most of my clients would also have allocation to some of these names. So none of the investors would have allocation to stocks like Tata Steel, for example, right? So which is a core economy stock, which could today maybe is rising because of rising commodity prices. I'm not putting into stocks, but I want you to address particular point on the possible returns coming from the consistent compounders over next 3-year period. You want to focus on 3-year period. So what will be your take on that?
So many of the businesses that you mentioned are some of the best franchises in the world, right? So will Asian Paints and Nestle continue to grow at a low double-digit rate? I mean, if you were a betting person, you would say yes. Now, I always say this: one needs to make a distinction between great quality businesses and great shareholder return businesses. Just because you own a great quality business doesn't mean it has to translate into great shareholder returns. The ideal example that we need to go back to, because everyone in India, including any investor that we speak to, idolizes Warren Buffett, right? You look at the shareholder return of Coke. You look at it when he started talking about it break Coke's shareholder returns over the last 30 years into 10-year buckets and look at the annualized IRR that Coke has given in the last 10 years. There has not been any problem with the growth rate of Coke, but the moment valuations are taken out of the window, one forgets the very core principle of investing around at what price you want to own a business. Now, how long euphoria lasts in the market is for anyone to anticipate or guess, right? People can continue to pay up for the consumer stocks. It can generate the returns. And there is merit to believe that Asian Paints should be, or Nestle could be, a part of an investor portfolio. It's easy because if an investor wants to own good quality businesses and does not want he doesn't have too much of time and attention to manage the portfolio, there's nothing wrong with owning it. As a fund, would we do it? The honest answer is no. I think it's important to realize every fund manager has his or her own thesis, right? It's important for that fund manager to stick to their thesis, and there's nothing right or wrong about it. Every fund manager is going to face certain cycles that they have to live through in terms of underperforming, right? If a certain cycle is working today, 3 years hence, it will not work. That's the way markets operate. The question at that point of time is, would the fund manager stick to that philosophy or deviate? Because if you deviate at that point of time, you're asking for a lot of trouble. So, I mean, long story short, if you're asking me, I wouldn't own these businesses. Is there merit in owning them? I think they are great franchises. I think the valuations are too expensive for us to get comfortable to own them at these valuations.
For a investor who wants to deploy another tranche of investment, assuming that his asset allocation has a room, because investor is earning, and because investor is earning, whatever he is earning is getting added to his savings or his liquid money, and hence instead of keeping it to debt, he would want to put that to equity, because as you mentioned, the interest rates are very low. So for that investor who already has an equity portfolio, has been holding an equity portfolio for long, but because he's earning regularly, is generating liquidity regularly, assume any CXO level employee or any industrialist or any any entrepreneur, right? What would be the strategy now, given the current period of next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months? Would you suggest that investor to deploy in lump sum as and when the liquidity is created, the entire corpus, or you would want him to stagger out, and why?
So this is a question that is best answered depending on how is the investor going to react if he sees the portfolio down 20% immediately, right? So there are two kinds of investors. One who basically says it doesn't matter as long as the process is right and the kind of investments that are getting constructed is robust, I can live with that 20% so-called drawdown. There are others who will approach this with a lot of regret. If you're going to approach the market with regret, saying that I should have waited, then I would say wait. When I say wait, do it over a systematic, let's say 4-month or 5-month period. Because if you believe that this is going to be a volatile period, where volatility is going to be a part of the market, whether it is COVID or something else. COVID is a reason that we give today. In an environment of easy liquidity, like what we have gotten used to, one thing that investors need to understand that volatility is part and parcel of this market. We can't get away from it. The question is, are you going to use that as an ability for you to deploy capital, or are you going to use it to time the market? What happens in the middle of volatility is investors then change their view around saying, let it fall further. So as long as you can have a very strict process that you don't deviate from, then you can say, I'm going to reallocate into the market over a staggered interval over the next 5 months. If you don't have any kind of a remorse bias where you go back and say, I should have and I could have, I would say invest in the market today.
Right. So to our viewers, I would like to just give one disclaimer that now we're going to discuss a couple of companies, couple of stocks, but this should not be construed as any kind of suggestion or advice. It is just for our understanding and education purposes that I'm going to ask some of these questions. So, within your portfolio, Naveen, you hold your top holding as Syngene International. I want you to please explain it to us. What is this business all about, and why there have been volatility into the stock over last 1 to 2 months, and what is your expected projection of this business, and why is this a top holding in your portfolio?
Sure. So, like Kamal mentioned, we own Syngene today. It doesn't mean that we will not change our mind if our thesis is wrong and get out of it. So, I'm not recommending Syngene to you, nor am I saying that it's the best investment that we own. One of the things that I need to clarify is, when do we allocate higher to an investment? Our higher exposure to any investment doesn't mean that we expect the maximum return out of this. It is quite the contrary. It means we expect a lower drawdown out of this from the rest of the portfolio. So what that means is, when we construct portfolios, a focus on drawdown is more important than upside maximization. So we are not looking at a portfolio to say, how do we maximize the returns at any point of time? We are looking at a portfolio to say, how do we minimize drawdowns at any point of time? So it's a slight difference, and it's important that people listening to this comprehend this. And it doesn't go to say that this is our best, so-called best idea at any point of time at all, right? The second thing is, we've owned this company called Syngene for almost 2.5 years. The first quite a long time before when we bought this stock, the stock did nothing, right? So the very fact that it is a significant exposure in our portfolio also has to do with the fact that over the last 1 year, the investment has done reasonably well for us. So that's the second thing, because we're sitting on reasonable amount of gains in this stock. Now, having said all this and giving the background, I'll just quickly talk about the business. The way I like to describe Syngene in a very simple way. So what IT services like Infosys and TCS was to the Western world was what Syngene was to the pharma world when it started. So many Fortune 500 pharma companies started to outsource their research development into the China and the India of the world. So one of the large competitors of Syngene is a company called WuXi Pharmaceuticals based out of China, which is almost 25 times larger than Syngene in the current context that we are talking about. Now, why do pharma companies outsource research? Because you have good quality PhDs and scientists at almost 40% of the price of the US. So it makes sense to start outsourcing. So it's not outsourcing rote work. It's important to understand that you're outsourcing really important work around contracting research. So the stickiness of working with a Fortune 500 company increases over time. So it's a very typical B2B kind of a business. The second thing where they started deepening relationships is post the research, they started developing manufacturing capacity, right? So basically, so assume that let's say I'm a Pfizer, okay? And I am looking at a gene therapy drug where I basically outsource the research of this gene therapy drug, because drug goes through various levels of trials. So there's a lot of pre-discovery work that's involved before it actually goes into commercial manufacturing. That work is outsourced in a sticky way with Syngene. So you can imagine, if I am a client of Syngene for the last 20 years, tomorrow a low-cost competitor cannot come out and say, let's take your business away, because these relationships are built over long periods of time. And secondly, what has happened post the research is manufacturing ability also comes, because all of these manufacturing requires huge amounts of capex, right? Now, the interesting thing about this company like Syngene is the P&L will look extremely depressed. If you look at the P&L growth in the last 3 years, it's extremely unattractive. I mean, it's like 12 to 14% annualized growth. However, if you just reverse it and look at the free cash flow growth, it's almost 85 to 90% over the last 3 years. Why? Because all the free cash flow growth has actually gone into funding your capex. So now, what an investor needs to basically have in terms of the thesis is, will this management use this capex, because some of the manufacturing capex has actually gone live now, to improve the fixed asset turns of the business? Because if that happens, you're going to see a pretty big inflection point. So that's the thesis, and that's the overall summary of the business. And that's why one of the reasons why we like the business. There are risks, like with any investment. There could be a poor execution on the ground where this may not work out. In that case, you will see us exiting. So we don't own any investment saying that we are married to this come what may. We look at this with a thesis, which we have in terms of our analyst team, and we evaluate the thesis saying what is happening on the ground. As long as there is no deviation from that, you will see us holding on to the investment. So the short-term underperformance that you spoke about, even if you look at it, the earnings that came out this quarter, the top line revenue growth was fairly muted. The bottom line grew a lot better. Free cash flow growth was significant, and we derive comfort when a business is able to grow its free cash flows, because that's the true strength of a business.
Right, Naveen. Thank you. So, kindly take us through, similarly, about Tata Consumer Products. The second stock, which I think is there in your portfolio. The allocation is not that much, it's lower, but I would like to understand more about Tata Consumer Products.
So, like you rightly said, it's a fairly small allocation in our portfolio. And in fact, for many of the clients who joined our PMS in the last few months, they don't own Tata Consumer because it's no longer valued at a price that we think has a margin of safety. Now, the way we approach investing, for us, investing in a business has always been in investing in people. There are times where, again, I'm just going to give a small background before going into Tata Consumer. Many people ask us, what is the right number of investment holdings I should own in my own portfolio? Because every investor that we manage, they run some portion of their money themselves. I think most investors like to invest themselves. And if you look at their portfolio, they might have 50 stocks, some might have 70 stocks, some might have 30 stocks. It depends, right? I always say this, go through your portfolio. If you, very simple test, just ask yourself two questions. Do you know the CEOs of all of your portfolio holdings? And do you know the market cap of all of your holdings? That's it. If you don't know these two, then that means you're having too many investments. You don't need to understand anything else, because many times you treat businesses as pieces of paper. Unless and until you understand the owners behind these businesses, unless and until you understand what the market is valuing these businesses at, how is it with conviction that you're even going to hold these businesses? Now, why am I saying this? Right? Because our original investment thesis on Tata Consumer happened because of the individual who came into the business. Right? So we've been following this gentleman, the current CEO of Tata Consumer, Mr. D'Souza, Sunil D'Souza. So his career path has panned from HUL, where he was Unilever's, basically, where he was the head of the European business, restructured multiple businesses there, then came back to India, took over the role of a CEO of Whirlpool, where one of the most efficient balance sheets in the country that you find even today, I would personally believe, happened as a result of Mr. D'Souza's tenure in Whirlpool. And late 2019, he actually made a choice to move to Tata Consumer, where they were focused on 5 verticals of Tata. There was clear communication by Mr. Chandrasekhar saying that these are the 5 businesses that he wants to focus on, one of which was Tata Consumer. And the entire management was getting rejigged around Mr. D'Souza. So that's what interested us, right? So there were 3 focuses again around the individual. A was to actually improve distribution. B was to improve the balance sheet in terms of the working capital that was actually getting deployed. Because if you study the balance sheet, there was a lot of leakage back then. And 3, the product portfolio. For us, when the individual moves and the management change starts to happen, we begin to take interest, and that's where we started building up a reasonable portfolio allocation to Tata Consumer. Today, again, you have picked a stock which has done well. So there is an element of bias there as well. So we've not added Tata Consumer in the last, I would say, 5 to 6 months in any of our portfolios, purely because it's not anything to do with the business is bad. The business is great. It's run by a gentleman that we love. But the fact that the market is valuing it at a valuation that no longer gives us comfort. So again, the genesis of why we invested, what was the rationale behind it? And today you're looking at the product portfolio expanding quite a lot. And with where tea and coffee prices are, they are reaping the benefit because they have some amount of pricing power as a brand as well. So that's a very over-the-top review of why we invested in Tata Consumer and what is our thesis behind it.
Right. Thank you, Naveen. So another particular stock that is in the portfolio is ITC, which you have been holding with, an average allocation. So please cover that. And this is the last stock, and then we will wind up.
Sure. So it's a good stock that you pick because this is a stock where we are down from the time we bought it, right? And I think it's important for investors to understand that the reason we construct a portfolio of anywhere between 20 to 22 stocks at any point of time is because we are going to make mistakes. We are fairly ruthless around the fact of cutting positions when our thesis is wrong. And we are in the middle of evaluating whether our thesis is wrong or not with ITC, right? So we don't own ITC because the PE is cheap, right? I think that's PE is according to us, because we invest in growth. It's a flawed way of looking at a business. One of the reasons we got into ITC was there was a clear case of capital misallocation. I mean, pretty much every investor today who owns ITC is aware of it. The free cash flow from the cigarette business, which is a robust free cash flow generating machine, has been invested into the hotels business, which has been EBITDA loss making for the last 6 years. Now, another thing that was happening on behind the scenes was their capital allocation into FMCG. And then if you look at any FMCG business, predominantly foods for ITC, there is a 5 to 6 year gestation period before you actually start seeing results. So there are two things that we expect. If both of this don't happen, you will see us exiting ITC even if it is at a loss. So it doesn't matter whether it is at a loss or a gain. When a thesis goes wrong, you exit. One, for the first time, the management is acknowledging the fact that they are not expanding their hotels portfolio. And maybe you have to thank COVID for it, but at least they're acknowledging the fact that the capital allocation was wrong there. Second, for the first time, you're actually seeing the FMCG margin starting to improve. I think if both of this continue to stay put as is, you would see ITC generate a healthy return from a shareholder perspective. Even if one of this starts to go wrong, then I think the thesis that we own, the thesis around which we own ITC will start coming to question, and you will see us exiting the name.
Right. So now, if you allow me, I may take 10 more minutes to cover some of the audience questions.
Absolutely.
Yeah, sure. So the first question is with regards to some of these commodity, led sectors like sugar, iron, steel. What is your view? Have they run to their potential, or there is still steam left?
So I always tell investors this: don't ask someone for a view who doesn't own the stock, because that someone doesn't understand the space, right? So do we own steel? The honest answer is no. Do we own sugar? No, we've never owned sugar. These are companies whose supply demand dynamics we are not very comfortable with. Today, if you look at it, I have a view, right? But what worth is a view when I don't have an investment in it? So I would always ask the investor or the audience to treat my view with a pinch of salt, right? So steel doing extremely well today has happened, according to us, as a result of the supply disruptions that we are seeing from a supply chain perspective. I still don't see a demand. So many people have already compared this move to a super commodity cycle boom between 2004 and 08. If that has to replicate, then this move further has to come from a demand pickup. Now, the 04 to 08 commodity super cycle boom was funded by China. Most of the capex came from China. If one believes at these valuations, India can fund the capex, then it makes sense to buy Tata Steel or let's say Balrampur Sugar today. Would we do it? The honest answer is no. We did not participate in this rally. So we would prefer to stay out of it, because unless and until we see the growth in free cash flows coming in, those businesses don't really gel with our philosophy of investing. So that's our honest 2 cents about it.
In your presentation, last slide, you had mentioned the sectors that you like, and you had mentioned 4 sectors. I remember IT, technology, and then you mentioned manufacturing, and then you mentioned pharma, and the fourth segment that you had mentioned was platform/infrastructure players. One of our audience members wants to understand what do you mean by platform/infrastructure players? Can you please explain that?
So a platform or an infrastructure is, so for example, the name platform came into being because of the Facebooks, the Amazons, and the Netflixes of the world, where you have something called a network effect. What's a network effect? Is the marginal addition of a user on the platform benefits all of the additional users who are already on the platform. Right? So you don't have a Facebook in India. So there's no point of discussing that. For India, I think a typical platform example would be an exchange. Any exchange, according to me, acts as a platform. Second, you also have financial infrastructure platforms, for example, servicing the mutual fund industries today. Right? These are almost proxy monopolistic industries because the entire infrastructure of the mutual fund industry is run on this platform. So typical examples of this are either exchanges or typically what you would find as an inherent dynamic of these businesses are these would be almost proxy monopolistic. Third, you can say someone like, let's say B2B, in the B2B space in India, you have a listed company like IndiaMart, right? That would be another platform business. So here again, I'm not saying someone should buy IndiaMart at these valuations. I'm just basically giving you examples of platform and infrastructure businesses.
So most of us believe that given so much uncertainty around over the last 1 year, markets have risen because interest rates were low and there was no other option to invest. And people sitting at home were not spending money and had added to too much savings. And that savings could not go to fixed deposits, could not go to debt funds, could not go to gold because those were not looking like attractive investment options. And that entire saving has come to equity. This has happened in India, has happened outside India. In India, we have added many new investors, which is known by the increase in the number of demat accounts. And all these new investors are young investors who, sitting at home, were adding to savings because they were not spending, and hence, they have added to the pool. Now, because the commodity prices are rising, ultimately, sooner or later, maybe after 1 year when we will be out of the situation, because of the rise in commodity prices, ultimately interest rates will again move up. And then liquidity will not be, as attractive as it is the case today. And then the argument which you were giving that over the last 30 years, this is the first time in India that the equation of equity versus debt is favorable towards equity because interest rates are low. It will not be true. What is your argument? What is your view in this regard?
Sure. So I always say, if you just rewind the statement, right, and just replay that statement in your mind, you will see the number of assumptions we as humans make in many of these statements. So what we said was interest rates will rise. As a result of interest rates rising, money will get pulled out. As a result of money getting pulled out, people will go back into debt. There are a lot of assumptions in this. And so the question is, how do you test these assumptions, right? Because that's a view that anyone could have. And I can say, I don't agree with that. No, that is not a sensible way to frame any kind of a thesis as an investor. So always I look to history to give us examples to say, just because interest rate rises, does it mean equities need to underperform, right? So let's go back in history and look at the period between 96 and 2000, or 2003 and 2007, or these are two periods I'm bringing up because these were two of the biggest bull markets in the US, right? Look at what actually happened in terms of the number of Fed hikes during both these periods. In both these periods, we came out of a low base and we almost had 12 quarters of interest rate hikes. So for example, between 2003 and 2007, the interest rate went up from a base of 3.25 all the way up to 6.5, right? In the US, I'm talking about US, not in India. And this was associated with one of the biggest bull markets in the US. Also, India went through its own bull market here back home as well. So just because interest rates go up doesn't mean equities are doing badly. Because what happens in this narrative, when is Fed going to come back and say they're going to increase rates, or RBI going to come back and say they're going to increase rates in a prolonged way? They're going to do that when the economy actually revives, the inflation picks up, the wage inflation also picks up, and the infrastructure spending goes up. All of this are beautifully conducive for equities. And you will enter into a cycle where everyone will actually get attracted towards equities in that cycle. Right? So just because interest rates move doesn't mean people are going to pull out of equities and move it into debt. What could happen is the valuations at which people are paying up to own certain companies which are not showing the free cash flows will start coming under question. Right? So you will have certain section of the market panicking, but stabler companies which are growing should continue to generate good shareholder returns as far as we are concerned. So just interest rates going up is not a precursor to an equity sell-off as far as we are concerned.
So since you follow a philosophy which is growth at reasonable price, what in your opinion, which in your opinion is a more attractive segment with regards to, I would say, creating a portfolio with risk-adjusted returns in mind, as you mentioned that you are wanting to watch risk first, you are wanting to watch drawdown first, right? So keeping that in mind, amongst large cap, mid cap, and small cap, if you have to address.
So here again, Kamal, I always shudder to speak about large, mid, and small because unfortunately, that's a SEBI classification, right? Businesses are not structured on large, mid, and small. Businesses are structured based on the tailwinds that they get by operating in a certain sector, the demands of supply and demand, and the fact of how they gain their market share. For us, when we look at small cap, we look at a space where we are sacrificing liquidity. So we need to risk manage that space from a liquidity perspective. So I don't come from the school of thought that I am bullish large cap or bullish small cap. I think that makes no sense. What matters to us is the growth rate on the individual companies that we own, right? So for example, Syngene is a good quality mid cap, right? The growth rate that we would attribute to Syngene is, from a free cash flow perspective, is almost compounding at 20+% today. It has nothing to do with whether it is a mid or a large cap. There are good quality large caps that we own, which are gaining market share and which are actually growing its free cash flow in the high teens from an IRR perspective. So it has got to do with the business rather than large, mid, and small. Now, from a portfolio construction perspective, I already told you the spaces that we own. One of the spaces that we are underweight on is the consumer space. Not because we don't like it, because in India, if you don't own consumers, then you begin to question where is growth for India. It's a question of basically saying, is it priced right or not? I think in our mind, it's priced for perfection. If inflation does pick up, I think many of these companies are going to have margin pressure. Now, again, the optimists will say the margin pressure is going to get offset by volume growth. It could happen, but it's just that there is no valuation comfort in our mind. It has nothing to do with the business is flawed. The business is still fundamentally great. I think it's an opportunity cost for us as an investor to say, what is the best quality portfolio that we want to be constructing to hit a high teens IRR that we are targeting from an investor return perspective.
What are the factors in Nestle and Asian Paints that you think have changed over the last 10 years that kind of have changed your mind? What factors did you see in 2010 which made you convince your fund managers to invest in them, and what factors have changed now that convince you now as a fund manager to stay away from them?
No, see, end of the day, there is a culture that is being built in a business, right? Something like a Nestle or an Asian Paints is almost recession free. And even if you had recessions, you could say that they have seen multiple cycles in the past. they are still one of the benchmarks in India for great capital allocation. From a free cash flow growth perspective, it's almost consistently they generate 16% on a every 5-year cycle that you look at. So when you get such businesses at, let's say, 2.5 times multiple of sales, you do realize that the market is undervaluing them. Now, when it is going to revalue them, no one knows. But when an odds are in your favor, it makes sense to allocate capital in that space. The same odds today, right, are not in favor according to us of the company. And I would have said that 2 years back as well, and I would have been wrong. So it doesn't mean that just because I believe that the odds are not in favor, Asian Paints are not going to generate the returns it does, because it has continued to compound, right? But that's fine. I always say, you don't need to participate in every party. There are certain parties you need to have the discretion to say, I don't want the hangover, but I am willing to come out of it early, right? So we did, to me, what made sense was owning a great business at a valuation where we saw comfort. Today, it's still a great business. The valuation comfort is not there. So the question basically begets, do you pay attention to valuation, or do you just say, I don't care about valuation, I just want to own great businesses at any price? Each person has their own philosophy. There's nothing right or wrong about either of them. It's a question of staying true to that philosophy, both during good and bad times. That's the important part.
So you like platform businesses, but I see your portfolio, you don't own InfoEdge, which otherwise is a platform business and is a well-known business. And I see that owned by a lot of fund managers, but not by you. Any particular reason?
So good question, Kamal. So we owned InfoEdge. We in fact sold out of it recently. We owned InfoEdge early 2019. We got out of our complete position over the last 2 months. Again, if you look at the core business, I think you're not going to find a better capital allocator in the country than Mr. Sanjeev Bikhchandani, right? I think time and time again, he's proved the kind of capital allocator he is. You would be envious of his position. But again, once now Zomato is IPO'd and your free cash flow is basically Naukri as a business, I think there are better opportunities for you to redeploy that capital than to own InfoEdge at these kind of valuations. Now, doesn't mean that InfoEdge can't double from here, because in an environment of low interest rates, funny things can happen in terms of valuations. For us, we feel that there are better redeployment opportunities of that capital at the valuation at which InfoEdge is trading. It doesn't give us comfort anymore to own a particular business at these kind of valuations. So most of the valuation gains out of Zomato, if the IPO does happen, should get realized. So then you are basically saying you have a lot of cash. So you need to get into this entire cycle of redeploying that cash and getting the growth, right? So you get your shareholder returns from two aspects: the ability to generate free cash flows and the ability to reinvest that free cash flows in the future, right? So now you got the cash. If you do monetize Zomato, you have the cash. Now, unless and until you redeploy and start this all over again, because the business of fund management, you get evaluated, whatever is your past, it's over. No one cares. You need to keep doing this over and over again consistently, which is why the longer the tenure of a fund manager, there is merit in the respect that he or she garners, because it's not easy, right? So that's the only reason we don't own that company anymore.
Right. So to all our audience, I'll just, give a recap of what I have understood with regards to the topic that we're discussing today, because I see, some of the questions coming, which says that, we have not yet answered clearly what is the advice on how to construct a portfolio. So I will try and, give a summary of what I have understood. So to everyone, definitely health is a paramount, and times are tough. It is an uncertain time, but what is being believed as this is a pause that we see with regards to economy, with regards to stock market. But given the fact that we have a stable government, given the fact that we have historically low interest rates, given the fact that some of the policies which have come over last couple of years or maybe 4 or 5 years have created such room that India's economy is seen at such an inflection point as China was seen in 2005, and hence, one can hope that next 10 years are going to give too much opportunity to many businesses to build money. Obviously, when it comes to selecting businesses, the sectors that Naveen highlighted that he liked are like platform businesses, which are the new businesses which have scale inbuilt in them, are like pharma businesses, are like IT businesses, and are manufacturing businesses. And within that, we have covered some of the stocks as well. Apart from this, he also highlighted that while constructing a portfolio, while diversification is definitely helpful, but one should create a portfolio of as many companies as one can track, because beyond a point, if one is just adding companies on somebody's saying on somebody's tip doesn't make sense. You should only invest in those themes, those companies which you understand. You can add anything which I have missed, Naveen, from here.
No, the only thing that I would like to add is, irrespective of who you pick as a portfolio manager, including yourself, there are going to be mistakes as well. The important thing around investing is to acknowledge those mistakes and be open around it. Because end of the day, your job is not to get all the investments right. The beauty of equities is even if you get 60% right and hold on to your winners, you are going to compound at a healthy rate, which is going to be better than 95% of the investor community. So that's the only thing that I would like to leave as a passing takeaway.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And one last point which I would like to highlight based on my learning is that investors should see equity not from the perspective of risk first, but from the perspective of returns first. Because equity as an asset class is meant to give returns. Only thing which is not known is the time horizon. So keep a long-term time horizon. Do not, just keep waiting, thinking that equity is risky, because uncertainty will always be there. Just have a time horizon and think equity from the perspective of returns. And when you will think equity from the perspective of returns, your focus will be on acting. And hence, finding out those themes, those sectors, those businesses where you can get better returns, maximum returns, or risk-adjusted returns. So focus should be on returns, focus should be on equities, and that is where you can build wealth. Otherwise, time is finite. But yes, as Naveen added, that if it comes to investing through ITUS Capital, he has a finite time defined with his 3-year horizon, and when it comes to selecting a company, he would keep that in mind. Which is something which is a knack which a fund manager can bring, because fund manager would keep follow up of the valuations of that level where one needs to enter. Today we may have discussed many stocks. As I said, I'm again giving a disclaimer that this is not a recommendation, this is not a suggestion. This is just an endeavor to educate our clients. This is just an endeavor to give comfort to our client. And we keep doing these interactions every week because we know equities and investment is an ongoing topic. It requires one to keep conviction, and hence it requires one to keep learning, keep knowing views. Thank you so much, Naveen, for sharing your time. And thank you everyone for attending this.
Thank you so much for your questions, Kamal. Sincerely appreciate this. And I want to thank everyone for taking the time to do this. It means a lot.